Welcome to
Good
the Teachers
evening.
Pep Rally, everyone. If you
Here
missed
we
our
are.
last episode, we spoke with pre-kindergarten teacher Natalie Legg about the importance of early childhood development. Please go back and check it out on your favorite audio platform or by visiting our YouTube channel. Please like it, share it, and review it. Our guest tonight is a dedicated Maryland English teacher with a passion for curriculum design and fostering learner-centered environments. Part of this work includes mentoring our new teachers. We can't wait to talk shop. Please welcome our friend and fellow educator, Earl Foster.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Welcome, welcome.
Glad
Yay,
to be
Earl.
here.
It's so nice to have you. You're up in Maryland,
Thank
which is
you.
great.
Mhm.
How's the weather, by the way,
Yeah,
up there?
getting chilly, getting chilly.
Chilly and windy. Bad combination.
Yes.
Chilly and windy. Western
Wind-
Maryland's getting some snow.
Look at that.
Wow.
It's starting early.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your role in education.
Okay. This is my 24th year in education, teaching. I've been an ELA teacher the whole time. I've worked in the same district, Caroline County, on Maryland's Eastern Shore. I've worked in two different schools. I was a middle school language arts teacher for 11 years. And then decided to try my hand at high school. I went to one of the two high schools in our district where I primarily taught, and I loved it, freshman English for 10 years. I loved it. Um, and then after a while, my daughter was getting to the age where she was getting to middle school. My wife works at the other high school in our county, and I decided to ask for a transfer back to the middle school where I started. That way, my daughter, my wife, and I would all be on the same campus.
Mm.
Oh, wow.
And so the last previous 2 years, I got to have my daughter in school with me every day, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
And my wife is next door to me. So I've been very loyal to the county. I love Caroline County. It's such an amazing county. It's small. We great communication, very tight knit community, and it is just such a wonderful place. I've also taught briefly remedial English at Chesapeake College in Wye Mills in Queen Anne's County in Maryland. I did that once, and I loved it. And someday maybe that might be what I look into doing when I retire in 6 years. But I couldn't imagine myself, and I've tried to imagine myself doing other things, but I don't think I can imagine myself being anything other than an ELA teacher because I get to talk about books for a living.
Oh, man, Earl, you and I are going to be best friends.
Rachel.
It's just wonderful. I've participated in numerous curriculum writing sessions over the years. I've been part of school PBIS committees a couple of times.
Mhm.
And I do enjoy working with curriculum because to me, it's like putting together an interesting puzzle, making everything fit properly. Um, I've mentored new teachers a couple of times, especially when I was at the high school, formally mentored, but I also like to check in informally with the new teachers that surround me just because
Yeah.
I know the effect it had on me 24 years ago, and I want to make sure they feel as welcome as I did.
I love that.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what we try to talk about here. The Teachers Pep Rally is the importance of feeling like you've got your trusted tribe, but also that we all are part of a community together, and we should be celebrating and lifting each other up and feeling like we've got each other's backs.
Yes.
When someone wins, we all win. When someone's struggling, we're all struggling, and we need to help each other. So I would say yes, yes, and yes to everything you said.
Thank you.
I too was part of a mentorship program in my district, and it was one of my probably favorite things I ever did. And it was in the high school level, and I would basically have a student teacher who was finishing up college and to graduate in education as an ELA teacher, and they would spend an entire year in my room, Earl.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, whole year. So from the beginning when kids started all the way to the end, which was great because it allowed me to have different phases with them. And by the end of it, my hope, and usually it was that they were running the show and I was just sitting back, just smiling and and watching them do it. So, what inspired you to become a mentor for new teachers, both formally and informally, you think?
When I started in 2001, the late great Harry Webb, my mentor, he just passed about a year ago. He had such an effect on me. Um, when when I started and went in for the very first time to the building, I had this gigantic list of questions. I think it was front and back of 2 or 3 pages on a legal pad. And Harry took the time to sit down with me, not just give me quick answers to every question, but gave me every detail I needed to know and then some. And then he would always check in with me to make sure I understood, make sure I was able to put everything into practice that he suggested. And anytime I needed him over that first year, he set aside the time. I mean, he was a coach at the high school next door. He would always tell me, if you need something, walk over, talk to me during practice,
Yeah.
call me at home. He went above and beyond what a mentor needs to do. And if it wasn't for him, I don't know if I would have continued on past my first 2 years. I had worked at UPS for 5 years prior to becoming a teacher and could have easily gone back. But a big reason things went reasonably successfully for me was Harry's mentorship. And I always wanted the opportunity to pass that on to somebody else.
Mm.
So many teachers come into our profession and within the first few years decide it's not for them and leave. What can I do to help some of those wonderful people stay? If there's any advice I can impart, any positivity, any wisdom, sharing resources, whether it's formally or informally, I'm going to do it. And they don't have to be an ELA teacher. I'll sit down with anybody who wants to sit down with me. I'll talk to any new teacher who needs help and make sure they're welcome, make sure they're part of the family. I like to look at the faculty as a family and not just a group of people who work in the same building. And it's just something I've always done. If I have something that I think's worthwhile to share, especially with a new person, I'm going to do it every single time.
That's awesome. It's the connections, right? And
Yes.
I think you hit on a couple of things, but the one thing I want to highlight is that you said it doesn't matter which content any of us are teaching, right? There's so many parts about being an educator that have similarities no matter what we're teaching. I can think back to when I was a student teacher, and I had a mentor who said, I want you to go in as many rooms as you can. That way you're seeing all kinds of styles. You might see good, you might see bad. Doesn't matter what content that were. And I tell people all the time, my best classroom management skills were learned by a middle school math teacher. It was just unbelievable what she was doing with those kids. And I was able to adopt and modify it in a way that I needed it when I taught English in high school. Right.
And one of my favorite instructional strategies for student discussion is something I learned from a social studies colleague. So a different content area, and it's something I've used at the middle school, something I used at the high school. So absolutely.
Yeah. My dream would be to be in Pete's room, because I bet that would be a big learning experience. All those kids, all those different ages, music.
When we were talking about tonight's show and I was reading and getting prepared, I look back. I fell into teaching. I had my degree, but I was still working as a performer, and the teaching situation came up, and I said, let's dive into this. And I did not have a mentor. I had no idea about it. And I didn't think about it. I've thought about it over the years. This is my 20th year. I've thought about it over the years here and there, and I've shared with other music teachers when I hear about, wait, what's this? You have this mentor. This is amazing. I wish I had that. I think I was just under the radar that year. I came in as a supply teacher for 2 months, and then they asked me to stay, and 20 years later, I'm still there. But
Awesome.
I think, gosh, if I had somebody like Earl or Aaron around, gosh, it would have been a lot smoother first couple years. There's certain things that came naturally, but there's other things that, wow, I really struggled. And I really wish I had that. And since then I've had student teachers, and I like to think mentoring. What I've looked at in the past when I was struggling, though, I was thinking of those teachers that inspired me, those past music teachers. And some of them were terrible. Some of them were awful, awful human beings. But I used that also to show me this is how I don't want to be.
Yeah.
These are the
Absolutely.
mistakes that I am not going to make. This is how I am not going to be. So I learned from the people, the best of the best that I came into contact with. And then also some of the ones on the other side. I learned from both, just like you said, Aaron, going into different classrooms and seeing different styles, different strategies. I think just becoming a sponge. I really missed out on that. So I think it's wonderful that Earl does this with so many other teachers. I think this is great.
Absolutely. And I'm going to ask Earl first, but then Pete, I'm kind
Sure.
of curious to hear your answer. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges when we think about our new teachers coming in? What do you
Oh,
think?
well, um, first I might say parent-student communication, and I always, whether I'm being asked for it or if I'm just offering it freely, one thing I always say is open the lines of communication early, even before the school year starts.
Yeah.
One thing I like to do most years is just about everybody's got email now. I like to send a blanket email to all my parents with a copy of the syllabus attached and just introduce myself, open myself up for questions. And I do the same thing to the students. I just word their email a little differently. And usually it starts off with a pretty good response. Because I tell them some personal information about myself, I'll have parents and kids come in on back to school night. Hey, you're from Easton, you're from Talbot County, or you like the New York Yankees. Why? You live in Maryland. You like and so I start building those connections right off the bat before they even sit in on my class for the first time.
Yeah.
So I think parent-student communication, if you open the lines early, I stress the importance of that. Classroom management, obviously, I, I I piggyback that off with communication because I think if you open those lines early, classroom management will become more of a smooth thing for you. Um, Along those lines, I always like to share, as a new teacher, behavioral challenges are going to be more difficult to handle. So I always tell students, no matter how poor a student's or teachers, no matter how poor a student's behavior is, when you make that phone call or you send that email, start out with something positive.
Yeah.
So I know as a parent, if somebody was going to call me about my daughter and all they had to say were horrible things, I'd
Yeah.
be bothered by that. Have you looked for something positive? So I stress that. And I also, I mean, when you sent these questions to me, this might be the one I made the most notes about.
Great. Oh, good.
Um, One thing is juggling expectations from school-based administration and
Mm,
then Board of Education instructional supervisor expectation. And if there are cross signals, getting those cleared up. You know,
mm,
and it's tough to balance that as a new teacher when you have these expectations and you need to meld them together to make them work. Um, I also I like to I think it's tough for new teachers to get a hold of work life balance. I
Mhm.
mean, teaching period, it's work life balance is a struggle, but I remember as a new teacher, I would take a stack of papers home like that thick just about every night,
yeah.
and I'm surprised my wife even was willing to get engaged to me because I was spending so much time doing, I was grading, 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 planning, planning, planning. So I like to talk about work life balance, leaving it at work every once in a while, not checking your email after 6 p.m., 7 p.m., whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and personal emotions. Um, I'd never really, and I'm pretty open about it. I'd never really had issues with stress and anxiety until I became a teacher.
Mm,
Mm,
And so I like to check in if I'm a formal mentor, or if it's just informal, like the new English teacher just up the hall from me. I like to ask them, how are you feeling? How's your anxiety? How are you managing your stress? And can I help you with that? Because when anxiety is heightened, you can feel like you're on an island all by yourself, and that's the worst feeling in the world.
yeah.
So if I can help them with strategies to make them not feel like they're on that island, not only will they be able to do their job more effectively, more importantly, their quality of life will be much better. And that's the most important thing.
I think that that's a great list. And I agree with all of them. And those are things in my mind, I'm like, there's some natural instincts with a lot of those things, but a lot of
Mhm.
times you need to really identify them and walk through them and recognize them.
I
All
agree.
all of them that you said. And the most important, I think, is for me is communication. I think a lot of people are afraid to be, transparent or trying to make those early on connections, but I think that that's so important because like you said, you're going to get a lot further as the year goes on if you run into challenges that you need to support the student with if you've already built those relationships. So that's
I
great.
agree. I also stress along with communication, documentation. Um, Back in the old paper and pencil days, I kept a big old binder full of it. Now I keep a Google sheet, um, dates, times, method of communication, nature of the call, and all that. Um,
mm,
and I that's so important too,
yeah.
for a young teacher to learn to cover themselves.
Yep.
Yep. You just
CYA.
never know.
Absolutely, absolutely.
How about you, Pete? Do you have anything you'd add to that
I
list
mean,
as new challenges?
totally like on the same page. I put how to communicate, uh, the importance of knowing the right way to say things at the right time, and
Hmm.
once you type something and you send it out there, it's out there forever. So, and that
Yes.
goes into handling your emotions. You feel personally attacked by a teacher or by a parent. You return that email when you're fired up. That's not going to go well. And I
Hmm.
think a lot of young people do that now. I think it's a very instinctive bump, 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 send, bump, 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 send. And I think there's a lot of regret sometimes. And when you're in this field, that regret leads to bad things. So, and we need those teachers to stay here. So I put that,
Yes,
and
we
then,
do.
looking at the work life, and I put stress balance. And with management that Earl said, I put clear expectations, understanding expectations for admin to you to your students, you to your families, and then expectations you and your own family, you and yourself. And that goes into that work life balance. So a lot of what Earl said, totally, I'm on the same page with.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like it would be easy, but in this education profession, there is a sense or a culture a lot of times of, more and more and more put on educators, and at some point you have to let it go and go be at home. you have to
Yeah.
you
You
have
do.
to turn it off or you won't be as effective for your students or for
And I
your
think that's hard for young teachers. I think that's hard because I
It
mean they're
is.
coming in. I want to change the world. I want to win these kids over. I want to make such a big difference and all. And burnout's a real thing. It
yeah. And like Earl said, there's not a total understanding when you're a new teacher of the various roles, where the rules and things of what you're being told you need to do are coming from. Is this just kind of a general department thing that we all do? Is this from the principal? Is this from an assistant principal that's saying this? Is this the board saying it? What's the policy? So, yeah,
Oh yeah.
spending that.
Oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
When I was still at the high school, I mentored two brand new English teachers for a couple of years, and I spent probably more time talking about the inner workings of the school and how things are done and what's expected and the mechanics of everything than I did talking about content with them. Hey, okay, this paperwork is due to this person by this date. No, you don't want to talk to this person about that. You talk to that person. Um, secretary is the most important person in the building. They make it
Mhm.
run, and yeah, that's so important. Like I said, we spent more time talking about that than content probably, and we share the same content.
So
I think that's
valuable though.
yeah, I think that's great because
Yeah.
a
So
lot of
valuable.
a lot of our university programs, they do focus mostly on the content, but it's those
Mhm.
little things. Even at my school, you reminded me, I taught them your maintenance staff.
Yep.
Make sure you
Oh
build good
yes.
Secretary
relationships
and
with them.
custodial. Those are
Yep.
your best friends.
Know what they
Mm.
like. And yes, sometimes like mine loved Gatorade. So I had Gatorade always at the ready for whenever he needed it. So he could, know that I always had his back and he would always have mine. So that's great.
Oh
All right.
yeah. I'm actually when I was at the high school, I was friends and still am with the head custodian. So anytime I needed some extra paper towels in my room, I had them within seconds.
Yep.
Tell you.
Yep.
So we're all kind of talking about the importance of building trust and building relationships, both with
Yes.
students, with the various staff members at the school. Earl, how would you say we need to make sure that we're building that supportive and trusting relationship with our mentors? How do we do that?
I think, and the phrase I came up with was supportive honesty.
Mm,
So they need to trust that mentors will give it to them straight, but also not make them feel awful about themselves. So if I remember one of the people I was mentoring at the high school taught a lesson that she felt didn't go very well. And I said, describe it to me. And we sat down, looked at her lesson plan, looked at student work, and she was verbally telling me about the lesson. And instead of blowing smoke, and sugarcoating, and I said, well, it does sound like that didn't go very well. But before I constructively, gave her some ideas, we talked about, I made her, what's something in there that did go well? What was even a little bright spot? And we found a couple things. And I said, see, it's not all bad.
that's right.
Um, but then I also think giving it to them straight in a kind way is very important. So I said, okay, look, here's a couple spots in your lesson plan where you could have done this differently. Here's a couple of ideas. Why don't you try it next time? Here's a part of your lesson. I remember saying this where there's a lot of lecture. But in a 90-minute class, you might want to cut down on that and move things around every 15, 20 minutes. So you're not doing the same thing too straight on. You know, the and things like that. So I gave it to her straight, hey, okay, we know this wasn't great, but how can we make it better? And every time either of them would come to me, that's how I would respond to them. But I also made sure that if they had something to celebrate,
Mm.
especially early on, we celebrated the heck out of it.
Mhm.
Makes a
I
big
just
difference. Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't just say good job. I'd make kind of a big deal out of it.
Yeah. I mean, it could be scary
Yeah.
running a classroom on your own for the first time, for
Those
sure.
little
It
wins
is.
are everything.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. I love too that I'm hearing that's a two-way conversation, right? It's not just, and I think this is a great evaluation for anyone, right? It's not just telling someone the constructive criticism, but it's giving them opportunities. Like you
Mhm.
said you had them thinking about things they could celebrate or that worked, but then also working together to come up with what you could do differently. Because look, here's the secret, everyone. It does new teachers aren't the only ones that sometimes have not a great lesson plan day,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Like it happens to everyone, no matter how many years of teaching you've had. And I'll go even further to say that we have to learn that sometimes what worked with one classroom in the day, like when I was
Yep.
teaching 10th grade English, Earl, I would teach 4 different 10th graders, groups of 10th graders throughout the day. Same lesson, but
Right.
it would go like if my neighbor next door, we'd come out and kind of evaluate each other, say, hey, how'd it go? How'd that one go? And it was funny. I would have one class where I was like, man, that was awesome. This happened and this happened. And then the next time later in the day, it bombed. So It's just that's part of this profession.
Yep.
Like you said, Earl, and we will talk about some curriculum design stuff in a minute. It's figuring out those pieces of the puzzle, and the more experience you have and the people like us that you can talk to, you realize where you can make those little adjustments throughout the day, even though it's the same lesson plan, depending upon your kids in the classroom.
Yep. I mean,
Yeah.
you're cooking, and you're tasting it as you go, and you're like, wait, it needs more salt. I got to change this recipe. This isn't going right. This isn't going right. That's me every day. I'm changing things on the fly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
You
Same
got to have
here.
that confidence.
Very rare does a class period go by where I don't deviate from the lesson plan a little.
Yeah.
And the way my schedule is now, I teach a class, then I have my planning right after my first class. So sometimes I'll take that planning period and I'm not working on the next day's lesson. I'm retooling that lesson for when I have kids come back. So I know it's more effective.
Yeah. Yeah. What advice would you give, Earl, to anyone who's thinking about being a mentor for either new teachers or just for colleagues? What advice would you give them?
First off, inquire with your school-based administration, your principal, your assistant principals. That's what I did. I went to my principal at the time at the high school and said, I'd love to be a mentor. Somehow I know that we're having a little bit of a turnover at the end of the year. So if you need somebody, call me over the summer. I'd love to help out. And so just by asking, about a month before school started, he called me. We've got 2 new English teachers coming in. Can you help them out? Can you sign the contract, be their mentor? And I did. So talk to school-based administration, especially when there's going to be some retirements or some resignations, and see if you can help out. But informally, I would introduce yourself to every new member of the faculty if it's feasible to do so. I work in a small school. We have a tiny faculty, a fairly tiny student body. So it's easy for a veteran teacher like myself to go around to all the new teachers. So I think that's so important. And that way they have somebody that they can connect with, and you can kind of informally help them out and give them ideas. In a less formal way. And I would say offer unsolicited advice, but don't be pushy. So I am not the formal mentor of the new English teacher that's up the hall from me, but I like to go and offer her unsolicited advice every so often. But I don't do it so often that she's like, oh my God, this guy's coming again. And so I leave her be, but I want to make sure that she knows I'm not the only. I mean, there's more than one person there to help her.
Yeah, that's great.
Earl, you mentioned celebrating the little and big wins of all these new teachers. Looking back, can you share any success stories, great memories, great stories, something that bubbles up, says, oh, that was such a great moment? Because you got to love doing this too, for you to keep chugging along. You're doing the grind for teaching, but then you're also pouring a little bit out of your pot to help others. So it's got to feed you a little bit too in some way.
Yeah. This is the easiest question for me to answer, because the one young new teacher I mentored was my 9th grade teaching partner. We were in the classrooms next door to each other. And she was nervous and tentative at the start of the school year, because this was COVID. This was before schools reopened, and we were all just teaching from our computers in our classrooms with no kids. And every day she'd come out maybe a little frustrated, a little nervous, and we'd always work it out. But I remember one day I could always hear her through the wall because she's right next to me. And I heard this music playing, and I knew it wasn't through a computer. Like, what is she doing over there? It's not our planning period. She and I both were teaching our kids about the differences between main ID and theme. She had written a song about the difference between main ID and theme, and brought her ukulele into school and played for the kids. right then and there, I was like, she's good to go. She was so enthusiastic and happy to do that and to share it with people. And that was probably one of the biggest celebrations that I can, something else I'd like to mention is the other person I was mentoring. She was an 11th grade English teacher. The year after I left to go back to the middle school where I started, and I celebrated this with her a little bit because I've stayed in touch with both of these teachers. She was given the privilege to teach a section of AP English 11 early on in her career, which is a big deal. And so I made sure that even though I wasn't working in the school with her anymore, I'm like, you're my friend, you're my colleague. You need to celebrate this because yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's a big deal.
Awesome.
Those are awesome. All right. So we mentioned a little bit of curriculum design. I kind of want to nerd out with you on this a little bit. So it's an important skill, right? To support
I agree.
new and veteran
Wholeheartedly.
teachers, right? So I kind of mentioned to you our listeners love lists. So I kind of asked, do you have a top 3 things you think teachers should focus on when designing curriculum, especially when we're thinking about impacting our students, making sure they're getting engaged and they're meeting their learning outcomes? So did you come up with 3 things?
Oh, I sure did. Flexibility, diversity, and cooperation.
Ooh.
Flexibility. Curriculum should never be set in stone and needs to be revisited often.
Amen.
And I'm not just talking about at the end of the school year for the start of the next school year.
Yeah.
I'm looking at my curriculum document once a marking term, and it based on the learning needs of students. If for example, if a certain unit in language arts, 7th grade, is geared towards getting students to better understand central idea and tone, but it wasn't achieved. Sorry, I'm mixing my words a little bit. Then that unit needs to be revisited. And we might not wait to the end of the school year to do it because you might forget the certain key parts. So it's important to be flexible. And I was the opposite when I started as a teacher. I was very rigid in everything. I hated to bend and flex, but with curriculum that governs what we do, the most important things are students, their needs need to be met, and you got to be flexible to do it. Diversity in 2 ways, with respect to genre and with respect to the content and authorship of the text. So if when I was a 9th grade teacher, I would have done the entire semester with Romeo and Juliet and Homer's Odyssey if I could have. I love those 2 things. And I think that a lot of the kids came to love them because I love them.
That's right.
But the kids also needed poetry. They needed short fiction. They needed nonfiction. They needed diverse authors. One thing I was so excited that we brought into our 7th grade curriculum last year was a great novel written in poem form by the author Kwame Alexander called The Crossover.
Yep.
And the kids gravitated toward it so well. Not only were we able to get into standards related to poetry, we were able to talk about theme, and so many standards linked into that thing, and the kids bought into it so well. And I'm so excited because the prequel to The Crossover has been added to our 8th grade classes. So my 7th graders I taught last year are going to get the prequel this year, and they're gonna love it.
They're gonna go nuts.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Cooperation. A single person should never be in complete control of the design of the curriculum. I've worked in situations like that. Multiple grade levels and content areas and admin and supervisors, all stakeholders who are going to responsible for the supervision and delivery of the curriculum, need to be working together. not just somebody saying, I need you to move this, this, and this around. There needs to be flexible conversation about what worked, what didn't, what might be able to replace what didn't work,
Mm.
so students' needs are met, so students are more engaged. And if they're more engaged, their needs will be more likely to be met.
Hmm.
So yeah, the flexibility, diversity, cooperation, real easy for me to come up with those three.
That's a
Beautiful.
great list. And I was going to ask you on a side note, what is one or two of your favorite books that you've done with the ninth graders? But you answered that. I think.
Yeah.
That's
Romeo
awesome.
yeah. There was a short story I want to mention. Guy de Maupassant, The Necklace. I'm
Yep.
not I love that thing so much. And when I came back to the middle school, I had an enrichment class of eighth graders who were, you could call it the highly abled class. And I did The Necklace with them, and they loved it. And we actually, it's because of the theme of greed that built in that story. I actually tied in a little mini lesson about Bernard Madoff, and
Nice.
we meshed it together. We did a whole essay with it. I love that story, and the kids really dug it once they got past some of the French language,
Yeah.
and it's great.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's fun when you start picking those themes out that the kids can relate to, especially when you relate it like you did to real worlds, events or
Mhm.
scenarios or people. It's so exciting to see them get engaged into that. That's
Oh, they
awesome.
loved it. Yeah.
I love it. So you mentioned one of your or your mentors when you were a student teacher or a
Mhm.
new teacher. Is there another teacher, or coach, or mentor, or someone from your childhood that you could tell us about that influenced you? Someone that you feel like inspired you in some way?
Absolutely. I can think of two, but Mrs. Nina Austin was my 11th grade Spanish teacher in the 93-94 school year at Easton High School. Was one of the most kind and enthusiastic people I have ever known. I was nervous about taking a foreign language because I'd never taken a foreign language. I knew nothing about Spanish. I just knew I needed to take Spanish 1 and 2 for college prep credits, and I loved it. I mean, not only did I do well in the class, I looked forward to going there. It was fun. I remember being out of school with a dentist appointment one day, being all numb, and mom was going to take me home. And I said, no, I'm not missing Spanish.
Oh wow.
Like, and so I went to school for Spanish and whatever classes I had after that. I knew with 100% certainty that she cared about us beyond the classroom.
Yeah.
And and this made me sad. She went out on maternity leave about 3/4 of the way through the year, and she did not come back after that. She resigned and went to another district,
Mhm.
but she came back for our graduation the following year.
Mm.
Wow.
And I'm not a crier. I don't often shed tears in front of other people, but I did that day.
Yeah, that meant a lot.
Um, I'd like to mention one other real quick, if that's okay.
Absolutely. We love these stories. Go ahead.
Yeah. When I was a freshman, which was the 91-92 school year, Mr. Howard Guth. Um, I've never been a science guy, but I loved that class. The guy had the way he talked to us was so informal. Um, he would put himself on our level to relate the material. He didn't try to talk above us. And he was always friendly anytime I saw him outside of school because he lived locally. We had a normal conversation. And I know, like Mrs. Austin that I mentioned, Mr. Guth cared about us so much. And I lost touch with him. I know he moved out of state after he retired, but the guy, he cared about our learning. He cared about our personal development. Um, you know, I remember when being in college, taking an earth science class and seeing Mr. Guth in St. Michael's, Maryland, which is where my family's from, say, how's that earth science class? And he would stay on me. He wanted to make sure I was doing okay because I wasn't a great student in high school. And those two people, and I'm an English teacher, neither one of them were English teachers.
Right.
But I became a teacher because of them.
Mm-hmm.
If it wasn't for them, I'd be slinging boxes for UPS probably, which is what I did for 5 years. And I loved those people.
Yeah, I heard a lot of similar things that you said about those two people in what you've been sharing today. So they would certainly be proud. So if you're out there listening and you'd like to share your teacher's story, just like Earl did, please call our hotline. We've got a fancy hotline this year that for teacher stories. It's 470-227-0877. That's 470-227-0TPR. Earl, if someone wants to reach out to you, they just want to kind of connect, what's a good way for them to reach out to you?
Search for me on LinkedIn. I can, if you would like, I can put my link to my profile in the chat. I will do that here in a second. I'm looking it up right now.
No problem.
But if you just look up Earl Foster, English teacher, Caroline County, Maryland, I will pop right up. And I love the my running slow here.
No worries.
If anybody looks at my LinkedIn profile and you see the picture, it's a picture I'm particularly proud of because that day is exactly 2 months before the world shut down.
Oh,
wow!
And that morning, my principal had come to me saying the state superintendent's coming. I need to take her somewhere, dependable where I know I'm going to see a good lesson. And that picture was taken by the state superintendent's team that was with her. So it was an honor to have her, the Maryland state superintendent, in my room that day. So my link failed to post.
That's right.
Well, I tell you what, we can put it in our summary notes if you like as we post the episode.
Sorry about that.
Pete, no worries. I know that if you look up Earl Foster, you'll see, like you said, the picture. I remember it because I think you're standing up. You're teaching. It's easy to find. And Pete, how can people continue this conversation with us?
Hey, everybody. So we're on Instagram, YouTube, our website. I think Facebook. And hey, please leave us a review. Let's keep the conversation going. Some comments, like, subscribe, follow. And Mr. Earl, I have a feeling, 100 episodes from now, we're going to have some new teachers on here, and Aaron's going to ask them the same question about somebody that made an impact on you. And we're going to have a bunch of people that are going to mention your name, sir. So thank you all for that you're doing.
Yeah.
I thank you. And I thank the two of you for the opportunity to join and share this platform.
Oh,
great. We're so glad you came.
Happy holidays. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Give me a sec.